In 1948, a body is found on a quiet Australian beach that would set off an international mystery. He's sharply dressed and he has no ID. In his pockets, all that's found is some loose change, a bus ticket, and a second-class rail ticket. All of the man's clothing labels are removed, and absolutely any trace of his identity is wiped. What investigators do find is a note that reads with the words Tamam, Shud, which is Farsi or Persian for the end. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Nearby the crime scene, a book is found that contains the same phrase. And what's more, the investigators uncover that within the book, there is a series of codes that have still not been cracked to this day. For 70 years, cryptographers have been trying to break this code with no luck. This is one of the longest unsolved mysteries in Australia. Strap in because we're about to plunge into a whirlpool of secrets, codes, and unanswered questions. This case takes place during a time when the world was still recovering from the aftermath of World War II. On the morning of December 1st, 1948, a jockey, John Lyons, is out for a ride on the beach. The beach known as Somerton Beach is a popular stretch near the Adelaide coast in South Australia. The sun had just barely risen, casting a golden glow over the sand and surf. As they rode, something caught Lyon's eyes. A man propped up against the seawall, his legs extended. In front of him, his arms and feet crossed. At first glance, it seemed as though the man was simply enjoying a peaceful morning by the sea. Upon closer inspection, it became apparent that something was amiss. The man was unusually still and his face had that waxy, dead look. Concerned, Lyons decided to alert the authorities. The police arrived at the scene at 6:30 a.m., led by Sergeant Lyle Leanne. This man was dressed in a white shirt, a red and blue tie, brown trousers, socks, and shoes, but what struck the investigator was the absence of any identification. No wallet, no driver's license, and no passport. Even more peculiar is the fact that all the labels had been meticulously removed from his clothing, as if someone had gone to great lengths to make sure he couldn't be identified. Just for people that aren't aware, this is something that's done in the spy world, but tags would be, especially back then, the tags on clothes would lead back to, especially a suit, to a tailor, so they would remove the tags, and it helps conceal the identity, makes people harder to track. But I don't know how well known that would have been back then to investigators or people to do that if they were doing a crime. Maybe it's just something that was more common back then. So the condition of the body does add a layer of mystery. There's no signs of trauma, no bruises, no cuts, and there's absolutely no indication of a struggle. His hands and fingernails were clean, almost as if he prepared himself for some sort of meeting. The man's pockets contained a curious assortment of items. An unused bus ticket from Adelaide to Glenelg, an unused second-class rail ticket from Adelaide to Henley Beach, a narrow aluminum American comb, a half-empty packet of juicy fruit chewing gum, an Army Club cigarette pack containing Kensitas cigarettes, and some loose change. None of these items offered any clues to his identity. The authorities were completely perplexed. Initial examinations suggested that the man wasn't in the water, and he had died in the resting position where he was found. A lack of identification, the removed clothing labels led to immediate speculation. The body was soon taken to the Royal Adelaide Hospital, where pathologist John Burton Cleland would attempt to unravel the mystery. As we'll see, the autopsy would only deepen the enigma surrounding the man from Somerton Beach. And if you think it's already mysterious, just wait until you find out what the investigators found in his pants. Sergeant Lionel Leanne and his team were faced with a conundrum that seemed to defy all conventional wisdom. Who is this guy? Where did he come from? And how did he die? The first step was to examine the man's personal effects, so they went through all his stuff. The bus ticket, like I mentioned, the comb, they looked through clues and anything. And as they're going through, they noticed that all of the currency is actually in Australian money, so it's no leads there. The bus ticket, however, is particularly intriguing because part of it was used the previous day, November 30th, 1948. So it means that the man traveled from Adelaide to Glenelg, but for what purpose? So he's not from the area, we know that. Why did he have an unused train ticket? Was he planning to go somewhere else? The different brands of cigarettes in the same packet also puzzled investigators. Why would someone switch cigarette brands but keep them in the same packet? So the investigators have their hands completely tied in this. They don't have any clues, any leads. They're just lost. And just when things were seeming hopeless, one of the investigators does discover a hidden pocket sewn into the man's waistband. Inside the secret pocket is a scrap of paper torn from a book with a cryptic message that stumped the investigators. So it completely reinvigorates the case, and this cryptic message could be the key to solving this guy's identity. Could this cryptic message be the key to unlocking the man's identity and the circumstances of his death? Stay tuned, because we're going to get into that next. So what exactly is on this piece of paper that we mentioned? It's the words Tamam, Shud. It's a Persian phrase or Farsi, and immediately the investigators don't quite understand what it means. And it would become the start of an even greater mystery. Linguistic experts were immediately consulted, and they soon identified it as a Persian phrase that means ended or finished. This led investigators to a book called The Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a collection of Persian poems that had been translated into various languages and is not just any book. It's a literary classic that delves into themes of life and death and the impermanence of human existence. The phrase Tamam Shud appears at the very end of the book, serving as a poetic conclusion to the work. Its presence in the man's pocket was not merely a random occurrence. It seemed to be deliberate, and it seemed to be a clue to something that might be linked to this guy's death. So right away, in a twist straight out of a detective novel, in a nearby car found unlocked near the crime scene, a copy of the Rubaiyat is found. Now this isn't just any copy. It had a series of letters scribbled on its last page, which is believed to be a code or cipher. Despite numerous attempts at the time, the code can't be deciphered. So what do? They go to cryptographers. The letters themselves are arranged in a way that kind of conveys a pattern and so letters weren't random. They're arranged in a way that has led many to believe that the cipher, or the code in this case, was professionally done. And we're not talking about a simple substitution cipher that you might find in a children's or kind of a puzzle book. This is something that was able to stump experts and cryptographers for decades. The sequence of letters is so perplexing that it's been analyzed using statistical models, frequency analysis, and machine learning algorithms. And guess what? It remains unciphered to this day. The code consists of a series of letters and numbers that are arranged in distinct lines. Some people speculate that it's actually a one-time pad encryption, which if true, would make it nearly impossible to crack without the corresponding key. Others think it might be mnemonic, basically a set of initials meaning something else, or even part of a complicated math formula. So, yeah, it could be anything. And something that about those one-time pad encryptions, it is a technique that's used with things like, if you're a spy, there's things called like number stations that might transmit data on a radio frequency. You're going to have a pad that has a code to decipher that incoming message. And when you're done with it, it's destroyed. And for the next transmission, you'll need a different cipher to crack the next transmission, because it'll be transmitted using a different kind of code. So it's a one-time use only. So we got all these things lining up. This is definitely no mistake. This guy ends up here. There's a book literally with a code in it that matches a secret piece of paper sewn to this guy's pants. So we got a mystery. There's absolutely no doubt about it at this point. I couldn't imagine what the investigators were thinking. And I could imagine this probably was all consuming for some of them. So let's go back a little bit. Like I said, there's no indication of how this guy died at the time. So even with the autopsy and the information that was gathered, there was no cause of death that was conclusive at the time. So he's just dead. That is all they know. It's the car that was found by the crime scene that contained the book, the Rubaiyat. The owner who remains that car has chosen to remain anonymous to this day. And in police reports, there's a person referred to as Mr. Francis. Now, as you might be wondering, why the anonymity? It's not really known if he was involved, particularly in this case, or his car just happened to merely be at the random location and the book happened to be placed in it. Mr. Francis reported finding the book in the glove compartment of his car, which was parked not far from the Somerton man. The proximity alone raises eyebrows. Was it a mere coincidence, or is this a deeper connection between the car and its owner and the unidentified man? The owner's decision to remain anonymous fueled speculation. Is he protecting himself or someone else? Could he have been involved in some covert activities linked to the Somerton man? Or simply a bystander who was unwittingly entangled in one of Australia's biggest mysteries? I get why he would want to remain anonymous. Like, who wants the attention if you had nothing to do with it? So either way, I don't really draw any conclusions from that. But I will say that if you're some kind of international spy, covert operator type thing, I don't think you're going to put the book in your own car and call the police. So upon examination, the book had some peculiar features. The last page contained the series of letters, the code. Now, if you thought the code was the only enigma tied to the copy of the Rubaiyat, there's more. There's a telephone number scribbled on the back cover of the book. And it wasn't just any phone number. It led investigators straight to the doorstep of a woman who lived a mere 5-minute walk from Somerton Beach, where the unidentified body is found. Let's pause and let that sink in. 5-minute walk in a case where every lead seemed to evaporate into thin air. Here was a living, breathing person almost at arm's length from the crime scene, like finding a needle in a haystack, only to discover the needle might be tied to an even bigger mystery. If you want to support the show, just give us a click follow. That's a great way to support the show for free, and we really do appreciate it. So, this enigmatic woman goes by the name of Jo Thompson, and she also uses a pseudonym called Justin. When the investigators showed up at her door, she seemed startled and almost evasive. Her reactions were a mix of surprise, confusion, and some say a hint of recognition. It was only as if she knew more than she was willing to share, fueling, again, endless amounts of theories and speculation surrounding this person. So now they have all these kind of interweaved people and stories or timelines, whatever you want to call it, connected to this body. Don't know who it is and don't know how he died. So police are like scratching their heads. The police did make a public appeal in this case, and they didn't get anywhere on it other than connecting with the anonymous Mr. Francis. That's how the book was turned in, or he identified himself to the police. The theories definitely ran wild with this case, or still do to this day. And we're going to go over a few of them that kind of try to explain away why you have a body washed up on a beach, no cause of death, his identity is concealed, he contains a secret message linked to a book in a car nearby that has a cipher to probably an even bigger code. Pretty cool mystery if you ask me. So the first one is that he is a spy. So it's the espionage theory. And being that it is at a time where the Cold War is dawning, it's definitely possible. The area is rife with political tensions and covert operations, and Adelaide was home to several military and industrial facilities, and they would have been of interest to foreign powers. The man's lack of identifications, like the mysterious circumstances of his death and the potential possession of obviously a cipher, points to the fact that he might have been a spy. Another theory is that it's an unrequited love and the man kills himself. The theory gained momentum when Justin was identified as a person of interest in this case. So Thompson living near the beach, and maybe he came to profess his love or caught her cheating or did something, and he decided to end his life. And it's a good theory, but it leaves a lot of questions to why would you just have secret code pants? So, another one is the suicide theory. And that's like anyone, he could have just been a guy suffering from depression and just not handling or coping with life. And he decided to, maybe it was just the one thing with any suicide theories around this guy is that there was no indication about how he could have died. So if it was self-inflicted, he didn't shoot himself in the head. There was no poison containers found at the scene. The toxicology reports are inconclusive. So it's just a real mystery. Another one is the prankster theory. It could again be somehow this guy, in a desperate attempt for either for attention or something weird, concocts this bizarre mystery and offs itself. And to be honest, it's not that far out there. I think humans are capable of about just any kind of crazy crap you can think of, so it's definitely possible. One thing I think about is the unidentified owner of the car being involved, not necessarily as a suspect, but maybe there was like a forbidden love. The Rubaiyat is found, right? And in 1940s Australia, being openly gay would not only stigmatize, it's straight up illegal. And it would provide a motive for both men to keep their relationship a secret. Could the car owner either have murdered the Somerton man, or could this be some kind of issue between two lovers that went wrong and it led to somebody dying? So, could be the case. However, there's not really any evidence pointing to that from the police because they're not talking about it, from what I can see. Other theories do persist over the years, such as a random attack of violence, organized crime. Maybe he was a sailor. And my favorite one is that he was put there by aliens. I'm just going to throw that out there. Yeah, it's like at this point, it's truly a mystery. And it's a mystery. So in 2019, the Australian government grants an approval to exhume the body of the Somerton man in hopes that modern DNA testing can finally reveal its identity. Led by Professor Derek Abbott from the University of Adelaide, the team extracts samples of hair and teeth for analysis. Despite the promise that genetic testing holds, the results were inconclusive. The DNA samples were entered into global databases and would not yield any results, leaving the man's identity still shrouded in mystery. However, the data would still be out there. At the time, they decided they would turn to digital forensics and code breaking. So they started using more and more powerful computers now, moving into like the 2019-20 area, and trying to decipher the code on the back of the Rubaiyat. And despite using all these computers and modern techniques, it still cannot be unbroken. Some experts argue that it might be a one-time pad encryption, so it ends up just being a meaningless sequence of letters, possibly, without the other part of the code. One of the things that's also done is facial reconstruction, and they do the isotope analysis from the man's hair, so it shows what he would have looked like based on his genetics. And during all this process, so they're hitting all these dead ends with the DNA sequencing, the cryptographer, up until a couple years ago, and a breakthrough comes through, and one of the rootless hair shafts yields 2 million single nucleotide polymorphisms, SNMPs, which honestly, that doesn't mean a lot to most people. But I can tell you what it does mean. It means that they have a genetic sequence, which means they can identify this person. So they do. They find that this genetics belong to a man by the name of Charles Webb, right? Mystery going to be solved? I don't think so. So Melbourne-born Webb was an electrical engineer and instrument maker born in 1905. This identification was made possible through the advancements in the genealogy that allowed them to trace back kind of his family roots and trace that to some family photographs and divorce papers which were discovered, which shed a tiny bit of light, but not a lot on his life. So not everybody was convinced that this was the guy, and there was some dissenters, but for the most part, I think it's been scientifically accepted, like this is the person. And when you put that together with the fact that you have this divorce and the age and the family photos, it all makes sense. The little bit that they do find out about him is that Webb was maybe a man who enjoyed playing some football, and his divorce papers describe his marriage to somebody named Dorothy Robertson and described him as moody and friendless, with indications that he may have attempted suicide. So this paints a picture of a guy that maybe isn't doing the best mentally, but it leaves so many questions. For the most part, like being depressed or being divorced or knowing this guy's name, and that's all I know, doesn't explain how he ends up on a beach. There's no cause of death. There is literally a secret note in his pants and a cryptograph, cipher, code, like Da Vinci's Code stuff. The most logical conclusion on my end is like him being an operative to have purposely hid this code in his pants. And being a civilian who knew how to do all this stuff doesn't seem very likely. It definitely seems that maybe this guy was doing some cool or not cool stuff. So thanks again for listening, everyone. And if the Ghost of Charles Webb is listening, please let us know. Please give me an email or something and just let us know exactly what the real story is with this. And if you have a minute, please give us a rating wherever you're listening and stay tuned for next week's episode.